I mean, it was like a progression of things.
You know, you come into college and there's so many new experiences and you're ready for college just to be like kind of the answer to all these things I've been thinking about inside my head.
I was searching for more like validation from others. Like the more I get of that, the more I feel like I'm doing the right thing.
When that didn't satisfy me, I thought maybe it's ambition or school or being like the best career-oriented person I could be. I thought if I just had more of that, then I'd be satisfied.
But it never was enough.
Alright, we're doing it. Hey, this is the real screen, this is the big screen, so just keep your eyes on the real screen. That's cool. Hey, can I tell you guys a story? You guys down for that? Alright, so I'm gonna tell you. Okay, go back with me. It's my freshman year of high school. Okay, so I'm fresh out of middle school, right? I'm king of the world. I'm top of the food chain at this point. Obviously, as a freshman, I'm like 135 pounds soaking wet, and this height, so I was a high player. And basically, I'm doing what everyone's doing when they first set foot on their high school campus, right? I mean, I am hunting for a girlfriend. Okay? That's a live picture of me in our high school hallways, okay? I'm hunting for a girlfriend, I'm like, hey, it needs to happen. And then this poor girl, I convinced this poor girl to date me, okay? And we don't need to talk about her very much, I'm not going to embarrass her, but that's a picture of her right there, okay? We'll get that off. So I'm like, I started dating this girl, and it's going great, right? You know, we hang out together, we eat food together, we went ice skating, so you know it's real, you know what I'm saying? But then fast forward, it's my sophomore year, okay? It's not even a year later. Guys, and like, life has just gotten hard, you know what I mean? You know high school, you know? It's just tough out there, you know? Spanish, I mean, dude, that's an entirely different language, you kidding me? And not only that, but guys, this relationship is taking a toll on me, okay? I've just lost complete faith in it. Like, I've lost all confidence in it. I've lost all belief that this thing is going to work out. I'm like, you know what? It needs to end, you know? So I'm like, hey, I don't recommend doing this. I make a list on my phone of 7 reasons that I'm going to break up with, okay? Just because I just want to, like, make sure, like, the cord is cut, you know what I mean? And I'm like, hey, like, this is what I'm going to do. I need to, like, go talk to her. I'll do it in person. I'll explain it to her, and then she'll know why, you know? Like, why would bring it up? It'll be great. There's closure, you know? And then, so I set the plan into motion, and you already know what's coming. I send it. I send the text. I say, hey. And then I follow it up. You know, can we talk? You know? And she probably knows what's up at this point, you know? So I drive to her house, so I saddle up, you know, in my whip, which was a swagger wagon in high school. My freshman year. It was a great time. It was Navy, though. Navy's way cooler. But I show up, she hops in the car. I don't want to break up with her in front of her family, you know what I mean? So then we drive to an elementary school, like 2 minutes away. And we're in the parking lot. And then I turn off the car. I'm like, hey, let's hash this out, you know? She's just in that front seat. And I basically like open my mouth to say something. I'm like, and she goes, hey, can I say something? I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, you know, get whatever off your chest and let's do this, you know? And she's like, hey, I just want to apologize for some things. And I kid you not, she like goes like almost verbatim through the things that I'm about to bring up to like break up with her. And she's like, hey, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for this. And I'm like, oh no, she stole my script. Like, this is not good. I'm like, what am I supposed to say now? So then, like, she kind of gets done. It's like 25 minutes in. Like, we're just sitting there. She's like said everything I'm going to say. So naturally, I start the car, you know? And I go to the driveway. And I'm like, and then she like says something. She's like, hey, so like, yeah, let's just like take some time to like settle down. And I'm like, hey, we're done. Like, just enter driveway. I'm just like, hey, now's my chance. Like, I'm like, hey, we're done. And she's like, are you kidding? You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, like, we're finished. She's like, wait, like, what? And then, luckily, she started crying. She gets out of my car, thankfully. And then I start going, guys, I just lost faith in the relationship at this point, okay? There's no coming back. I start driving home, I get a call halfway, she's like, sweet, you know, done. And I'm like, yeah, like, we are. And then, it was good. There's closure for both of us, you know what I'm saying? So, that's what happened. Hey, and we probably all feel that to some degree. right? Like we all have had like faith in different things before, but you get to a point, I'm like, dude, I had no faith. Like I had no confidence that this thing was going to go through. And that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about this idea of faith, right? And some of us put our faith in like all types of stuff. We do it all the time. Like some of us put our faith in relationships. Obviously, I didn't. But then like, think about when you hop in your car and you like pull up maps on your phone, you're putting your complete faith in like maps to get it to where you need to go, right? You're like, hey, this is gonna lead me in the right direction, it's gonna be great. Think about like a practice exam for a test. You're like, oh yeah, like I have faith that if I can ace this thing, I'll be able to do well on the test. And you're like, wait a minute, it was nothing like the practice exam thing, you know what I mean? But on a more serious note, like people put their like confidence in a ton of different things in life. Like think about like a 4.0, you know what I mean? It's like some people are like, hey, if I choose a 4.0, that'll lead to the job that I want, which will lead to like the money that I need to get by, and I'll be able to work as little as possible. And like that's what's gonna do it for me. Like that's what I'm confident will give me like life and satisfaction. Some people just put their faith in like what people think of them. They're like, hey, like if I just get a bunch of people around me to like respect me, like me, then I'll like be good then, and then I'll be satisfied, whatever it is. And some people just put their faith in themselves. They're like, hey, I'm gonna be the ultimate authority on like what gives me life, what doesn't. And that's what people put their faith in. But what we're going to be talking about tonight is real faith, okay? What does real faith look like? So just a definition of faith real quick is just complete trust or confidence in someone or something. That's all faith is. It's just a surety in something. You're like, hey, like I'm confident, I'm completely confident in this thing. And specifically tonight, we're going to be looking at this, answering this question right here. It's what does real faith in God look like? What is complete confidence? What does complete trust look like in God specifically? And I think a lot of people have like different like impressions of what this looks like already. You know what I mean? Like some people I feel like think that real faith is just religion. It's just like, hey, you can pick whatever religion you want, and then that's your faith in God, and then that's it. That's what real faith is for people. And that's not what real faith is. Like some people think real faith is just rules, like just a bunch of rules, a bunch of do's and don'ts. They're like, yeah, if I had a real faith in God, a genuine trust in God, I'd just be like following these rules. And that's not what faith is. Some people think real faith is like a have to, like something that it's like, like I probably should do that. You know what I mean? So I have to do that. That's not what faith is. Some people think real faith is like subjective or like relative. Jordan kind of talked about that last week, but real faith isn't subjective or relative. It's in a very real God who's a person. And some people just think real faith is like a conscience clear, right? It's like it just removes guilt from people. But what I hope you guys leave with tonight is a real picture of faith. Like a real, genuine, what does it look like to actually have a relationship with God and live for it? And in order to answer this question, we're going to be looking at one story in particular. It's about Jesus and this woman who's like suffering from a disease. It's printed at the top of your handout, the entire thing. We're just going to read it, and I think I just love this interaction because we're just going to learn a lot about what real, genuine faith looks like just from this one woman that's mentioned. It's in Mark 5. But we're just going to go ahead and read it together, so you can follow along with me. But it says, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garment, I'll be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. It's kind of crazy. And then she goes on, it says, and Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So this is kind of like a crazy scene, right? Like, if you go back, it's like, there's a woman, she's been having a disease for 12 years at this point, and she's suffered a ton after a ton of different physicians or doctors. She's tried to see people about this. It says she spent all she had, and isn't any better because of it. She's actually worse off with it. But she hears about Jesus, and she's like, hey, like, okay, like, this guy could probably heal me. So much so, she believes it so much so that she goes and says, if I just touch the fringe of his shirt, if I just touch the fringe of his garment, like, I'll be made well. And she goes and does it, and crazy enough, she's made well. And then Jesus stops, recognizes her, and says, hey, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go, you're good. And I think there's a lot of different things that we can pull away from this woman and her interaction with Jesus. And that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be trying to answer this question, okay, what does real faith look like? And we're going to even go through some different things that isn't real faith. It's actually fake faith. So the first thing that I feel like we can notice about this woman is that real faith orbits Jesus. It is completely centered around Jesus. And you see this in the life of the woman. She is locked in on Jesus. In verse 28, she literally just says, hey, if I touch even his garments, I'll be made well. She's banking all she has. She's tried pretty much everything else at this point. She's like, hey, I've tried physicians, I've tried doctors, but if I touch Jesus' garments, I'll be made well. And that's where she's setting her faith. Her eyes are on Jesus. And that's what real faith does. Real faith puts Jesus at the center. There's another verse that talks about this. It's Galatians 2:20. It's a guy with real faith writing. And he says this. He says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. He's saying, hey, the life that I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God, aka Jesus. Right? Jesus is how I'm living my life now. He's at the center of it. You can kind of think of it like our solar system, right? So you got the sun in the middle, obviously everything revolves around the sun. And then you got Mercury, Venus, Earth, all the way up to Neptune. Pluto is not on this, so Pluto must not be a planet, right? I feel like that's a hot topic of mine. Maybe it's not. Okay. But anyway, so it's hey, with our solar system, the sun is at the center of it, right? If stuff stopped revolving around the sun, there would be some issues. I did the classic Google search. I was like, hey, what would happen if the Earth stopped revolving around the sun? And then I read this article, and this is what it says. It goes, first off, if the Earth stops short, you'd actually die immediately. Because you fly off the planet and hurtle into space. So if someone slams on the brakes in the car and you launch forward, that would happen, but into space, okay? But he doesn't stop there. He's going. He's but if Earth slows down more gradually, okay, you'd actually just slowly catch fire and you burn alive. It says it goes a slower but still horrific death. And then another one is if it sped up, it would actually leave orbit, and then we just freeze because we'd be too far away from the sun's heat. There would be issues, okay, if we stopped orbiting around the sun. But that kind of relates to faith, honestly. If faith isn't orbiting around Jesus, then it's not even really faith, and there's some issues because of it. This is what it has to look like, what faith has to look like in order to be real. Jesus has to be at the center. So you can look at those different areas of life. It's hey, me, my own priorities, my life now revolves around Jesus. My family, my friends, the way I spend my time, my money, social life, hobbies, school, all those things, Jesus is now at the center of it. And all those things default to him. They submit to him. That's what real faith does. And if real faith, or if someone's faith doesn't have Jesus at the center of it, it actually is more like fake faith. And this is what fake faith is fake faith orbits self. It just orbits self. Instead of having Jesus at the center, what actually ends up revolving around everything is just the self. And this is kind of what their solar system would look like. It's hey, I'm at the center of it, and kind of how I spend my time revolves around me, what I do with my social life, how I interact with my family, my friends, what I do with my money, my hobbies, school. It all revolves around me. And if you even notice in the bottom right, it's hey, Jesus still may be in there, God may still be a part of that person's life, but the difference is it's just revolving around them. It's not the other way around. And because of that, they kind of miss out on a real faith, a real relationship with God. They don't have Jesus at the center, so they kind of just make up their own version that isn't even really God, if that makes sense. So not only does real faith orbit Jesus, but the second thing I feel like we can pull away from the woman is that real faith proves itself. It proves itself. The woman, she proved it. We kind of get, we hear from Jesus himself. He goes, hey, you had faith. You know what I mean? At the end of the story. But you can kind of just tell, based on how she lived her life, that she had real faith, right? Like if you look at verse 27, she had heard reports about Jesus, right? But it didn't stop there. She like comes up behind him in the crowd and touches his garment. Like there was some action involved there. And that's what real faith has, is like action behind it. There's another verse that talks about this. It's James 2:17. It says, so faith also by itself, or so also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Saying, hey, if faith is there, but it doesn't have any like action behind it, there's no works behind it, it's actually dead. It's not even really faith. Let me give you a quick example, okay? The first one to touch this stage gets a $10 Chick-fil-A gift card. All right, you got it. Okay, yeah, so literally find me after. I have a $10 Chick-fil-A gift card for you. I'm gonna give it to you, Jason. Okay, so we had like 2 people who actually believed me, right? How could you tell that those people believed me? Yeah, because they ran up here. You know what I mean? There was some evidence of their faith. They were like, hey, okay, I believe this dude. You may actually have a Chick-fil-A gift card back there. Like, I'm touching the stage. And you can tell. Well, that's what real faith does. Real faith proves itself. You can tell they believe me because they prove it. If that makes sense. Whereas, and real faith proves itself, but fake faith actually just has no evidence. You can't even really tell that faith is there. Like if you interacted with a person that had fake faith, and like they told you that they were like, yeah, like I have a relationship with God, like He's at the center of my life, you kind of be like surprised or even a little bit confused. You'd be like, really? Like I had you? Like I had no idea. You know what I mean? Because there would be no evidence in their life. Jesus actually calls out a lot of different people in the Bible for having like fake faith. Luke 6 is an example of it. He literally is talking to people and he says, hey, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? He's like, there's an inconsistency here. It's like you call me Lord, like you call me like authority or boss of your life, but you don't do what I tell you. So there's no real evidence of it. It's kind of like a bandwagon fan, okay? I don't know if anybody know a bandwagon fan? I feel like we've all interacted with bandwagon fans before. Let's just say you're talking to somebody, you're like, you go up to someone that's wearing like some Chiefs gear, and you're like, oh, you're a Chiefs fan, you know? And they're like, oh yes, like I am totally a Chiefs fan, you know what I mean? Like, of course. And you're like, dude, like how have you been? Oh, my entire life. I've been a Chiefs fan my whole life. And it's like, oh, no way, that's cool. Well, then you remember this guy, right? And then the person you're talking to, maybe like a fan you're talking to, they're like, is that like an off-brand Pat Mahomes? I have no idea who that is. And you're like, no, that's Matt Castle. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's okay, well, maybe you're young, okay? But surely you remember this guy. And they're like, no way. I had no idea the State Farm guy played for the Chiefs like back in the day. That's crazy. And you're like, no, that's Alex Smith. And you start to get a little skeptical at this point. You're like, hey, like this person you're like, man, you're like, okay, well you're a fan right now, right? Name 3 players that aren't these things. And they're like, I have no idea, you know? And at this point, you're like, dude, are you even a Chiefs fan? And they're like, yes, I love soccer. And you're like, okay, wait a minute, soccer? Like this is okay, you're not a Chiefs fan. They're actually a fake fan. You know what I mean? There's no real evidence that person is a fan. And that's kind of what it's like for someone who has a fake faith. They're kind of like a fake fan. It's like there's no real evidence in their life that would show that they have a genuine relationship and trust in God. They may like go to Sunday services. They may say they have a value for faith. They may wear a cross necklace. You know what I mean? But like at the end of the day, if you looked at their life, there'd be no real evidence of their faith. If that makes sense. But real faith, it actually proves itself. So real faith, it works with Jesus, it proves itself, but then also, and this is one of the coolest parts I feel like about real faith, is real faith makes you well. At the end of the interaction with this woman, Jesus literally just says to her, hey daughter, your faith has made you well. Like literally, it made her physically well. Her disease was gone. And she could go after that. And there's 2 ways a real faith makes you well. The first one is just in eternity. Okay, so the Bible talks a lot about how we're just separated from God by sin, and that the only remedy for that is to believe in Him and place our trust in Him. And once you do that, like now have, you're made well in eternity. Like you get to spend eternity with God forever in heaven and no longer be separated from Him forever by sin. But not only does it make you well in eternity, it actually makes you well here and now, which is crazy. Jesus talked about, was talking to a group of people in Matthew 6. They're like anxious people. They're flustered about stuff, they're worried, they're stressed out. And this is what He tells them. He says, hey, therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? And then this is how He caps off. He says, but seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. He says, hey, even that last part, He says, hey, seek first the kingdom of God. Hey, have real faith in me, place your trust in me, and I'm going to make you well. Like all these things will be added to you. He says, let me take care of the rest. You trust me, I'll take care of the rest. It may not look how you think it will, but trust me, I'll make you well. It's kind of like, I feel like in college, I got sick all the time. Like literally, like I'm sniffling right now. I'm like, dude, once every 3 weeks, I was like, yeah, I'm bad. Okay, I was like struggling. And I would go to this place all the time. Anybody been to me yet? Maybe not, raise your hand. Yeah, I guess times, you know. But being, or sometimes people would go to K-Stat. I feel like Rick and Terry, see, some happy K-Stat people. Anyways, anytime I set foot into either of these places, I wanted to be made well. And I knew that the only way that was going to happen is if I got my hands on one of these bad boys. Okay? This is a Z-Pack, right? Anybody ever taken a Z-Pack before? It's antibiotics. So it deals with the root issue. Okay? Like if you're actually sick, like it actually cures it. Whereas if I went into Levine and I only got like cough drops, I was like, oh no. Like I may feel better, like my cough may feel better for a second, but I'm not going to be made well. You know what I mean? And real faith is like a Z-Pack. I mean, you are going to be good afterwards. Day 5, you're coasting, right? That's what real faith does. And whereas real faith makes you well, fake faith leaves you empty. In the interaction with the woman, at the very beginning, you kind of see, I feel like it really does give you a picture of what life is like apart from Jesus. We'll just read it real quick. It says, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. She had suffered much under many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but grew worse. And I don't think this verse is saying like, hey, doctors are bad. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's what it's saying. But I feel like it really does provide a really clear picture of what life apart from Jesus with like a fake faith is like. It doesn't give you the results that you want. It doesn't lead to what you think it will. And it's not gonna make you well. It's gonna actually leave you empty. It's like going to a Levine and getting cough drops. It's like, hey, it may feel better for a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's gonna leave you empty and not fix the problem. Well, that's a little bit of the difference between real and fake faith. But something that we think is invaluable here is just being able to hear from one of you guys, someone who's actually living this out and actually has a real faith in a college student. So what we're going to do is we're going to welcome up Graham. Graham's going to talk about what this looks like in his life.
Hey everybody, like Caleb said, my name's Graham. I'm a senior here. I'm excited to tell you what this kind of looks like in my own life. So I grew up in a Christian household. I was pretty involved with church. I was there helping set up and tear down after service, playing in the bands, going on trips, leading Bible studies. And my parents were even gracious enough to let me go to a Christian school all the way from first grade until the end of high school. And if you would have asked me senior year if my faith was real and if I was following Christ, I would have been like, yeah, duh. But it really didn't have any bearing on the rest of my life. I mean, I knew the answers, I knew the culture, I knew the stories. But outside of church and every once in a while at school when teachers were looking, like, God was definitely not at the center of my solar system at all. And this continued even into my sophomore year of college until some older guys in my fraternity who were trying to help me grow in my faith invited me to go to SMC, which you'll probably hear about later. And I didn't really want to go first because I didn't know them super well. But I went, and just seeing their lives for those 4 nights that we were there, I noticed that their faith was real. It definitely played into every aspect of their life. And then COVID hit, and they asked me to move into a trailer home with them instead of go home all separately. And so we were all packed in this really tiny house. And so I get to see really, really up close and personal just how their faith impacted every area of their life. So I kind of started to notice that, man, if they called their faith real and I called my faith real, there was definitely some disconnect there. And so through that, I just saw how fake my faith actually was, that I thought was so real growing up. And so I started to see that I needed to actually make God the center of the solar system and actually let Him have control and change things about the rest of my life. And when I started doing that, I just saw so many things change. And just my mindset about certain things change. I think the Bible, God's Word, was a big one. It was no longer just a textbook that I would use in school, in Bible class, or something that I would hear talked about at church. But I began to read it and study it and kind of learn about it myself. And I just saw how relevant it was even to a 21st century college student as I applied it to my life. Prayer was the same way. I got to learn to enjoy prayer. It wasn't something that I just said before a test or a soccer game, but it was something that I genuinely craved doing. I even remember the other day, sometimes I'll just go walk around the neighborhood, around my house, and just talk out loud to God in prayer. And I remember thinking, people probably think this is so weird, some guy's just talking to himself all the time. But there's really like nothing that I would rather be doing. I genuinely craved doing that, and even getting to see God answer prayers and getting to know Him better just through talking with Him. My relationships with friends has changed. It's not just based on who I went to high school with or what hobbies we happen to enjoy, but it was just based on things like they knew what I needed to grow closer to God and to be more like Him, and they loved me enough to call me out if ever I started going off track. My relationships with people in general has changed. Like sharing my faith was something I only did if I was put in a situation where somebody was kind of forcing that on me or something like that. But now you can see it as an opportunity of like, man, God has saved me and forgiven all my sins, and now He even wants to use me to do the same in other people, even guys who live right down the hall from me. So that's a little bit of what that has looked like in my life. Just so I started to see how fake my faith was. And really started to make it real and let it impact all the other areas of my life. Thank you guys for listening. I'm going to give back to Caleb. He's going to show us how we can do this stuff.
So we're just going to close by talking about a few quick things that we can do as college students. It's like, hey, so what does it look like for a college student to have real faith and have a genuine trust and confidence in God? And Graham was mentioning a lot of these things. But the first thing I would say is just get to know God. Get to know the one that you would put your faith in. Just like any relationship, even relationships that have no faith, you know what I mean? But like, you can grow your faith and grow your confidence in God. Get to know God. Doing things like coming to student nights, we're going to be talking about what it looks like for a college student to grow in their faith and different steps that you can even take. That's a great way to do it. Another thing is, I would say, just read the Bible 10 minutes a day. Like, if you've never read the Bible before, like, actually start reading it 10 minutes a day. I looked it up. Instagram, the average user on Instagram spends like 53 minutes a day on Instagram. Average user on Snapchat spends 50 minutes a day on Snapchat. I'm not even saying, like, cut all that time out. I'm just saying, hey, take 10 minutes. Take 10 minutes of your day and just start to get to know God. Next thing you can do is just admit fake faith. I think there's just a reality that if I was like talking about fake faith and you're like, man, like that's kind of how my like faith looks. That's totally fine if that's you. But I would say like, hey, admit it and then like move forward from there. Try to take steps towards real faith and try to put Jesus at the center and actually getting to know God. And that's the last one is just, hey, make Jesus the center. Maybe there's just some areas of your life where you're like, hey, like I'm actually going to give this to God and make Jesus the center of it. A lot of those areas of life to revolve around Him, and then see what He does with it. And for all these, I would just like talk to a friend. If you came with someone, or if you know someone that has like a real faith, ask them. It's like, hey, like what could a step for me be in order to start to have real faith? I just love this interaction between Jesus and the waiting woman. Like, I just think it's cool. One of the coolest parts of the story, I feel like, is Jesus' response, like God's response to this woman's faith. If you read around what's actually going on, Jesus has just been stopped by like this high up official, and like this guy comes up to Jesus and he's like, hey, actually my daughter is on her deathbed, I need your help. And Jesus is like, okay, let's go. And he's following him through like crowds of people, and they're trying to get somewhere. And this woman touches the fringe of Jesus' cloak, or his like shirt or whatever. And Jesus stops. Like he was going somewhere, but he's like, no, like you touched me. And then he takes some time to like recognize her and he says, hey, daughter, your faith has made you well. No place. I think it's like one of the coolest things if we can actually please God. Because God cares about our faith in Him. What we're going to do now is just take some time to discuss. So discuss these questions with the people around you, and our MCs are going to bring us back together.